Before we begin, Galactic Horrors is now on Patreon. Get daily stories in one place, with no ads and no interruptions. Link is in the description or search Galactic Horrors on Patreon. Now, let's begin the transmission. The briefing said, fast mutating recombinant virus with extreme somatic effects. That was the full pathogen description Vertex Biologics provided before they loaded 4 men onto a helicopter bound for eastern Tennessee. 12 words. In my experience, 9 years of Army chemical and biological defense work, 3 more in private sector containment. When the client dedicates more pages to the liability waiver than to the pathogen profile, they already know what killed their people and would rather you learn it on site. My name is Grant Sadler. I'm the biowarfare specialist attached to Halcyon Biosec's Eastern Rapid Response Unit, a 4-man team contracted to pharmaceutical and defense firms when containment work gets too ugly for their own safety departments. On deployment, I assess the pathogen, what we're dealing with, how it spreads, and which protocols keep us breathing. The rest of the team handles the kinetic problems. Captain Roy Linden sat across from me in the helicopter bay, running his hands along his rifle's receiver for the 3rd time. A ritual. Linden's version of cracking his knuckles before a door kick. 15 years of field operations had given him a deep and useful suspicion of any mission described as straightforward. Next to him, Pete Dunning ran a gloved thumb over the inside of his left wrist, where a subdermal biometric implant sat beneath the skin. The implant was Vertex's key to the on-site data vault, coded to Dunning's living biosignal, required for physical access, and the reason Halcyon had sent a tactical security specialist instead of a second medic. Dunning caught me looking and tapped the implant. "Door key's still alive," he said over the headset. "Keep it that way," Linden said. Dunning looked at me. "You hear that, Doc? I'm mission critical and emotionally appreciated." "You're a biometric accessory with a pulse," I said. He smiled once. "That bedside manner keeps me calm." "Good, stay calm." He went back to checking the seal on his sleeve. He always did that before insertion. Wrists, elbows, neck ring, breath control valve. Then he checked mine, not because he doubted me, but because teams like ours survive by making trust mechanical. A man does not need to like you to keep you alive. He needs to know his hands will go to the right place at the right time. Carl Jessup, our combat medic, sat nearest the open door. Youngest of the 4 of us by close to a decade, he kept glancing at the hills below, memorizing his exit route before the show started. He had already checked his trauma kit twice, then checked ours, then checked the spare morphine ampules because the client had described somatic effects and sent no medical addendum. That told me something about him. He still believed, at some level, that a team carrying a medic had been sent to save people. The Lockbourne Pharmaceutical Research Campus appeared through the tree line as we banked west. One flat-roofed service building sat among gravel lots and rusting chain link on a hillside that hid the real facility underneath. 3 subterranean floors carved into a repurposed Cold War bunker, where Vertex ran research that needed concrete ceilings and a limited witness list. 72 hours earlier, a containment breach had shut the facility down. 48 hours earlier, all communication had stopped. The facility went silent. We were the first response, which in corporate extraction work means the team cheap enough to risk before anyone decides the place is worth saving. We set down in the south lot at 2200 hours. The surface building was dark except for emergency lighting. Amber strips along the roofline casting shallow pools across the gravel. The loading dock door was sealed. Linden keyed it open with the override code Vertex had supplied, and we entered in formation. Linden on point, Dunning and Jessup flanking, me behind with the sampling kit and portable drive. Inside was an admin floor, reception desk, coat hooks with coats still hanging, coffee mugs on desks, dried rings at the bottoms. A badge lanyard lay on the floor beside a spilled paper cup. the ID card half soaked in old coffee. The place had been abandoned mid-shift, the kind of sudden departure where people drop what they're holding and go. A security station at the corridor junction still had its monitors cycling through camera feeds from the sub-levels. Most showed empty hallways. A few displayed static where cameras had failed or been destroyed. One, labelled SL2 East Wing, showed movement, shapes in the frame, distant and hard to resolve on the small screen. They moved in short, jerking bursts, then paused, then moved again. The motion had a hunting quality, though I couldn't have defended that impression with anything more precise than instinct. "Building powers on emergency backup," Lyndon said. "Generator fed, ventilation systems still cycling air." "Keep your seals tight," I told them. "If the pathogen went airborne, the HVAC is pushing it through every duct on every floor." Jessup looked at the stairwell door beyond the station. "Any live personnel we extract?" "Any live personnel Grant assesses first," Lyndon said. "Then we decide." Jessup did not like that answer. He did not argue with it. We took the freight elevator down to sub-level 1. The doors opened on painted cinder block, institutional green, scuffed at the corners from years of gurneys and equipment carts. Biosafety zone markers were taped to the floor in faded colours. Yellow for general access, red for restricted, orange for transition zones. The tape was old, curling at the edges. Emergency lighting burned at maybe 60% on this level. Enough to see by, too dim to trust what you were seeing. The first wrong detail appeared 30 metres in. A medical gurney lay overturned at a corridor junction, its leather restraint straps snapped at the buckle points. Something had broken free with enough force to shear the hardware. Blood covered the padding and had pooled on the tile beneath it. From that pool, 2 blood trails extended in different directions, one toward the stairwell, one toward the east wing. I crouched beside the pool and studied the smear patterns. Both trails showed drag marks, the kind made by bodies pulling themselves across a floor. But the pool held only one person's blood volume. 2 trails. One source. Dunning crouched beside me. "Contact blood, still tacky." "Yes. That isn't enough blood for 2 bodies. It isn't." He waited for the rest of the assessment. I didn't have one. We pushed deeper, following Vertex's mapped route toward the observation corridor outside the Biosafety Level 3 lab suite. The corridor narrowed. Glass observation windows lined the left wall, each looking into a sealed laboratory module. The first 3 modules were empty, equipment still powered, centrifuges dark, workstations abandoned with samples racked in their trays. The 4th window was fogged from the inside. I wiped condensation from the exterior glass with my glove and looked through. A man stood in the center of the laboratory. Mid-50s, wearing the remnants of a white lab coat, his name badge still clipped to the breast pocket. He was alive. He stood with his feet apart and his arms hanging loose, facing away from us at a slight angle, and for a moment I thought he was in shock. Then his spine moved. It arched backward in a slow deformation, the way a steel beam bows under weight it was never engineered to hold. The vertebrae pressed outward against the skin of his back, each one visible through the coat fabric, and the arch kept going well past the point where the spinal column should have fractured. His lab coat drew tight across his shoulders, then tore at the center seam as his upper back began to swell. The skin beneath the torn coat stretched and went translucent. A second face was forming beneath it, pressing upward from inside the musculature of his back. I watched it build itself. Brow ridge first, pushing the skin up in a smooth mound. Then the bridge of a nose. Then lips, parting and working against the membrane that still covered them. The face was identical to the man's own. The same broad forehead, the same heavy jaw, the same slack effort, like a newborn working its mouth for the first time. The original man's face had gone rigid with something beyond pain. It was the expression of a body performing an instruction the mind had not consented to receive. Jessup moved toward the airlock door on our left. I put a hand against his chest. Stay off the airlock. He's still in there, Grant. He's aware. Look at his face. And the seal is keeping whatever is happening to him inside that room. Step back. Jessup's hand hovered near the door control for half a second longer. Then he lowered it. We stood at the window and watched the second face press free of the man's back. Trailing wet membrane, the duplicate mouth opening and closing without sound through the glass. Condensation thickened across the inside of the window. The process was generating heat. The man's body was burning through its reserves so fast the room temperature had visibly shifted. I turned to Lyndon. The briefing told us nothing. Tell me what you can. Whatever this pathogen does, it builds a second body out of the first one. That's what the blood trail was. One person became two. I looked back at the window. The researcher had collapsed to the laboratory floor. The shape on his back continued to grow, pulling itself free by slow increments, its arms pressing against the membrane like a man pushing through a wet curtain. The data vault just became critical, I said. If this virus is what it looks like, the research archive is the only material that will tell anyone how to counter it. Lyndon studied the window for another 3 seconds. Then he turned away. We pushed to the vault. That was the decision point, though none of us recognized it at the time. We could have taken the freight elevator to the surface, called for a military containment perimeter, and waited for a full hazmat battalion with 10 times our equipment and manpower. Instead, we descended deeper. I pushed for it because I believed the data justified the risk. Lyndon accepted because he trusted pathogen assessments from specialists who had earned that trust, and I had earned it. The 4 of us walked farther underground, into a facility that had just shown us, through 6 inches of sealed glass, exactly what it could do to a man. Sub-level 2 housed the facility's medical wing and containment ward. The stairwell brought us out near the east end of the floor, where administrative offices gave way to clinical space. The change was immediate. Corridors widened for gurney traffic, the flooring shifted from painted concrete to sealed tile, and equipment alcoves appeared at regular intervals, stocked with emergency supplies that had been torn through and scattered. We passed through the triage area. Whoever had organized the facility's final response had set up improvised treatment stations, rolling carts loaded with IV supplies, intubation kits, induction drugs, and surgical tools arranged on paper-covered examination tables. A half-filled sharps container had been knocked over near the wall. Syringes lay scattered underfoot. Jessup crouched, checked the labels on 2 empty sedative vials, then looked toward the containment ward without speaking. The paper on one examination table was dense with handwritten clinical notes. I picked it up while Lyndon covered the corridor. The notes described somatic duplication events in a physician's careful handwriting that deteriorated across 3 pages. The early entries were clinical: onset times, observed symptoms, duplication rate markers, nutrition dependency, exposure route. Direct tissue transfer produced faster events than aerosol exposure. Later generation tissue samples were worse: higher viral load, higher replication aggression, faster conversion. By the final entry, the penmanship was barely legible, and the clinical language had collapsed into a single repeated line. Splitting faster now. The containment ward occupied a corridor of heavy isolation rooms, reinforced steel doors with small viewport windows, electronic locks on independent power, intercom panels mounted at chest height. Standard pharmaceutical isolation design, built for pathogen work involving infected human subjects. 7 rooms, all 7 locks showed green, powered, engaged, holding. From behind the doors we could hear them. The first room, rhythmic pounding, something heavy throwing itself against the steel. The second room, a man crying in the exhausted, airless way that comes after screaming has burned itself out, and grief has settled into something lower and more permanent. He was saying please between breaths, the word worn to a whisper. The third room, silence for 10 seconds, then a wet, dense impact against the door from inside. A pause. Then another impact. Heavy, like a body being used as a battering tool by something that did not care what it did to the body. The fourth room was different. A voice came through the intercom, a man reading his own vital signs off the monitor inside his room. Heart rate 118, blood pressure 92/61, core temperature 39.4 Celsius, all trending upward. A breath. You're the response team. I stepped to the intercom panel. The name placard on the door read, Dr. Alan Marsh. Through the viewport window, I could see him sitting on the edge of the containment room's cot, shirtless, his torso visibly distended on the left side. He watched a wall-mounted vital signs monitor, observing an experiment he had lost the capacity to influence. Halcyon Biosec, I said. How long since exposure? Approximately 36 hours. He said it the way someone reports a shipping delay. Factual, dispassionate, resolved. Aerosol strain, lower initial load, slower event. He inhaled carefully. His left hand tightened against the swollen part of his abdomen. For 6 seconds, he could not speak. The shape under his ribs moved in slow rotation, the outline of a shoulder pressing outward, settling into a new position, then pressing again. He looked back to the monitor. The duplicate is consuming my liver and left kidney to construct its own organ structure. I estimate 3 to 4 hours before somatic separation completes. He turned from the monitor and faced the viewport. His eyes were clear, sharp, unfogged by fever. The left side of his abdomen bulged outward, the skin stretched and discolored to a deep mottled purple. You're here for the vault, he said. We're here to assess the situation and recover the research archive. Vertex wouldn't deploy 4 men for containment, your retrieval. He studied me through the glass with an expression I recognized from career researchers. The cold satisfaction of being right about something terrible. Then tell me what we're retrieving, I said. His mouth tightened. Beneath his skin, the forming shoulder shifted again. Marsh pressed the heel of his hand against the swelling until the pain passed. When he spoke, his voice had lost none of its precision. Project Tandem, Vertex's internal classification for a biological force multiplier weapon. Design intent was simple. Infect one target behind enemy lines. The virus hijacks the host's cellular machinery and constructs a complete physical duplicate from the host's own biomass. Cognition, brainstem function and appetite, gross motor capability, aggression, hunger drive, higher reasoning, speech, tool use and recognition are absent. He looked past me toward the other doors. A perfect physical copy with an animal's operating system. What feeds the build? Host tissue first, critical organs near the end, after separation, any usable carbon-rich feedstock. Flesh, fat, stored food, grease, some polymers, rubber, soft plastics, oils, metal and glass are left behind. They'll chew through anything else trying to reach what they can use. Behind one of the doors, something hit steel hard enough to make dust fall from the ceiling joint. Marsh closed his eyes for 1 second, opened them. Transmission. Fluid contact. Bites, blood exposure, open wounds with tissue transfer. The aerosolized deployment strain was released during the initial breach and is now circulating through the HVAC on backup ventilation cycles. Your sealed suits should protect against aerosol exposure. Any suit breach involving direct fluid contact with infected tissue means active infection. Jessup had moved closer to the viewport. His right hand rested on the morphine pouch clipped to his kit. Incubation timelines? I asked. Aerosol exposure, 6 to 20 hours depending on host physiology. Direct tissue transfer is faster. Much faster with later generation material. Marsh's breathing shortened. For a moment he lowered his head while something inside his abdomen pushed against the wall of skin. The virus is adapting through each replication event. The numbers we had yesterday are already wrong. The duplicate's coordinate? They cluster around food sources, they pursue motion and sound. They can run, climb and force open standard doors. Locks, tools and machinery remain beyond them. He paused. They wear the faces of everyone who died here. Every person who worked at this facility. You'll recognize them. Don't let that cost you a second of reaction time. Dunning shifted behind me. Jessup had gone very still. The vault, I said. What's in it? Full archive, viral architecture, engineering records, every variant we built and tested, including failures. Countermeasure research that was defunded 18 months ago because the weapon exceeded performance targets, and the board decided a cure represented an unnecessary budget allocation. His hand rested against his distended abdomen, fingers spread across the discolored skin, holding the shape beneath it, the way a man holds a wound to slow the bleeding. You should understand what you're carrying out of here. I did understand. The data I'd been sent to retrieve was the design package for a bioweapon. The company that built the weapon was the company paying for the retrieval. The briefing's vagueness had been liability management. 12 words of pathogen description to keep the retrieval team from asking questions that might require honest answers. My orders had not changed. Marsh stood from the cot with visible effort and crossed to the viewport. He came close enough that I could see the individual blood vessels in his sclera. "Open my door," he said. "Shoot me." "I can't authorize that. The containment seal is redundant. The aerosolized strain is already in the ventilation system. Your suits are your containment barrier. These doors aren't protecting you from anything. I can't verify that, and I'm not breaching a sealed isolation barrier on the word of an infected subject. That's protocol, not a judgment on your credibility." His expression didn't shift. "I built the thing growing inside me. I understand precisely what happens when it finishes. If you have any capacity for mercy that your protocol hasn't trained out of you, you'll put a round through this viewport and end it." Jessup stepped closer. "Grant." "No. The viewport is reinforced laminate," Jessup said quietly. "A contact shot angled down might preserve the seal. Might is not a containment standard. It's a man, not a sample. It's a sealed room containing an unknown recombinant pathogen with confirmed human replication effects." Jessup looked at me as if the sentence itself were the problem. Marsh watched us both. For a moment I thought he would argue again. Then the thing inside him shifted, and all the argument went out of his face. He returned to his cot, lowered himself onto it with one hand still holding his side, and picked up his vital signs where he'd left off. Heart rate 122, blood pressure 89/58, downward trend on perfusion. I stepped away from the intercom. Jessup stood 3 meters back, watching me. He kept his voice below the intercom's pickup range. "He asked you to kill him. He asked me to breach a containment door. That's a different request. He's going to die in there regardless of what we do." "Correct. That fact doesn't change the risk profile. Our job is the vault." Jessup held my gaze for a beat. Then he looked back at Marsh's door. Behind it, Marsh's voice continued its recitation. Jessup took one morphine ampule from his kit, turned it once between his gloved fingers, and put it back unused. Then he fell into formation. We moved west toward the cafeteria junction where the emergency stairwell to sublevel 3 was located. Behind us, the containment ward doors began to fail. The pounding from the first room had changed, the rhythm gone, replaced by a sustained assault on the steel. Whatever had been inside that room when the door sealed was finished splitting, and what the process had produced was stronger than what went in. The reinforced doors were built for pathogen containment, for keeping sick men inside. They were not built for something that could throw a man's full body weight against steel without registering damage to itself. The doors would hold for a while. A short while. The emergency stairwell to sublevel 3 was accessible through a fire door on the far side of the facility's central cafeteria. Lyndon pulled the cafeteria's double doors open, and we saw why the evacuation had failed there. The cafeteria was a wide, low-ceilinged institutional room, 6 rows of fixed tables bolted to the floor, a kitchen service line along the left wall, and a grid of exposed ventilation ductwork running the full length of the ceiling. The fire door to the stairwell stood on the far wall, 40 meters away. Between us and that door, hanging from the ducts, wedged into vent openings, clinging to grillwork with fingers and half-formed limbs and knotted masses of tissue, were dozens of duplicates. They covered the ceiling. Some were nearly complete, recognizable human shapes tangled in torn lab coats or maintenance coveralls, features fully formed, eyes open and tracking our entrance from above. Others were still assembling themselves, torsos without hips, partial arms, mouths that gaped and worked without sound. They hung from the ductwork by whatever grip their unfinished hands could manage while they consumed everything within reach. They had eaten through the vent housing's rubber seals, the insulation around the duct joints, the plastic casings of ceiling-mounted emergency lights, and each other. Two had fused at the abdomen while fighting over the same food source, producing a single suspended mass with 4 arms and 2 partial faces that pivoted independently, scanning the room below. The floor beneath them was stripped bone, gnawed plastic fragments, shredded clothing, and long smears of organic residue. Cafeteria trays had been overturned and scraped clean. The rubber floor matting had been torn up in strips. The kitchen service line was gutted. The walk-in freezer doors hung open, the contents long absorbed. Lyndon raised a fist and we stopped inside the entrance. The stairwell door was visible on the far wall. The route to it ran along the right side of the room, beneath the lowest stretch of ductwork. The kitchen was left, behind the service counter. The clones hung above both paths, but the densest clusters had gathered over the kitchen line, where the food had been. "Back through the medical wing," Dunning said. "The containment ward will breach before we clear it," Lyndon said. "This is the route." I studied the room. The clones were feedstock-driven. Marsh had confirmed it. They had clustered here because the cafeteria had been the densest source of usable material on the floor. Food stores, organic waste, fats, oils, plastics, rubber, each other. They'd stripped the space down to bones and fragments, and they were hungry. If we crossed that floor, we became the richest food source in the room. "The kitchen stores," I said. I pointed past the service counter to the open kitchen doorway. Through it, I could see the remains of an industrial kitchen, commercial ovens, a grease trap access panel, and bulk storage racks still holding sealed 20-litre drums of cooking oil. The clones had not breached the drums. Metal rims, hard plastic walls thick enough to slow them, still intact. Cooking oil, grease traps, polymer floor matting. There's enough in that kitchen to start a fire the ventilation system will feed for 20 minutes. Lyndon looked at the ceiling, then at the kitchen, then at me. "You want to burn their food supply so they chase the fire instead of us. They'll run toward the fuel. Burning fat and polymer are still carbon sources to them. They'll try to consume the material even while it burns. We ignite the kitchen side. Every clone in this room swarms left. We cross along the right wall to the stairwell. And if the fire spreads across the whole ceiling before we make it, then we move at speed." Lyndon weighed it for 3 seconds. "Dunning, Jessup, set charges in the kitchen. Thermite, 2 canisters. Place them against the oil drums and the grease trap housing. 15-second remote igniters. Trigger on my call." Dunning and Jessup edged along the left wall toward the kitchen entrance, staying below the vent line, moving beneath the canopy of hanging bodies. The clones above them shifted, tracking the movement with the lazy attention of predators watching something too small to pursue. I held position at the cafeteria entrance with Lyndon, hand on my sidearm, measuring the distance to the stairwell and the time it would take 4 men to cross at a controlled run. Through the kitchen's serving window, I watched Dunning and Jessup work. 1 canister against the stacked oil drums, 1 against the grease trap access panel. Jessup armed both igniters, then paused half a second longer than necessary to check Dunning's suit sleeve where it had brushed the service counter. Dunning saw him looking. "Clean?" Jessup gave the fabric a hard wipe with a decon pad. "Now it is." Dunning looked across the room at me and gave a small 2-finger signal. All good. I returned it. They edged back toward us. Charges are in position, Dunning said. 15-second delay your signal. Lyndon moved us to the right side of the entrance. On my mark, Jessup triggers the charges. We go along the right wall. Nobody stops. Nobody engages. If something drops on you, the man behind you rips it off. We keep moving until we're through that fire door. Jessup triggered the igniters. 15 seconds. The kitchen erupted. Thermite hit the cooking oil and the grease trap simultaneously. A wall of fire climbed the left side of the cafeteria, white-yellow, chemical hot, rolling across the kitchen surfaces and pouring through the serving window into the main room. The heat struck like a pressure wave against the suit fabric. The clones responded as a mass. Every one of them turned toward the fire. The completed ones released the ductwork and dropped to the floor, landing in crouches, crawling and dragging themselves across the stripped tile toward the blaze. The incomplete ones followed, tissue masses detaching from the vents and falling in heavy, wet impacts, pulling themselves across the floor with whatever limbs they had built. They crawled into the flames. A clone, tangled in the shredded remnants of a security uniform, walked directly into the pool of burning oil and collapsed, its body catching fire while it continued clawing at the floor. Another tore a strip of burning rubber matting loose and pressed it against its own torso, the heat searing into the tissue of its hand. They swarmed the kitchen side, climbing over each other for access to the fuel, piling onto the burning ones to consume them as they burned. Right wall, Lyndon said. Spacing tight, move. We ran. Along the right wall, low and fast, boots crunching over bone fragments and rubble. The fire roared on our left, filling the room with heat that the ventilation system drew upward into the ductwork and fed back in a cycling furnace. Above us, a few clones still hung from the ducts, the least complete ones, barely formed enough to keep their grip, too unfinished to drop. They watched us pass with lidless eyes. 20 meters from the fire door. 15. The heat bent across the ceiling in a visible wave, and a burning clone near the kitchen wall reversed direction, moving toward us instead of the fuel. Drawn by our motion, its body wrapped in flames, it did not register as damage. 10 meters. 5. Dunning was ahead of me, 2 steps from the fire door, when a completed clone dropped from a vent directly above him. It landed on his back and drove him to the tile. Its hands found his right forearm and raked across the suit material with fingers that hooked and pulled like claws. The suit sleeve tore. Beneath it, the clone's fingers cut 3 parallel gashes through the skin of Dunning's forearm. Shallow, compared to a bite, but deep enough to bleed immediately. Deep enough that in the instant of contact, I could see the clone's exposed tissue, wet and glistening with fluid, pressing into the open cuts. Lyndon drove the stock of his rifle into the clone's skull, knocking it sideways off Dunning's back. Jessup put a round into its torso and it folded. Dunning scrambled forward, blood running from his forearm, and Lyndon hauled the fire door open. We piled into the stairwell, and the door slammed behind us. The fire door was rated for 90 minutes. Through the seam at the bottom, I could see the orange glow of the cafeteria burning itself out. Dunning sat on the stairwell landing, holding his right forearm. The suit sleeve was torn open from mid-forearm to wrist. The 3 claw marks were ragged and bleeding in the steady, persistent way that meant the cuts had reached the full thickness of the skin. Blood and something else, a thin, clear fluid from the clone's tissue, mixed in the wound tracks. I knelt beside him. Jessup moved to assist. Back, I said. He stopped, but he did not move far. The cuts were not deep enough to disable the arm. That was the only good thing I could say about them. Direct tissue-to-tissue contact between the clone's exposed flesh and Dunning's open wound. Active fluid transfer confirmed. Based on Marsh's explanation and the physician's notes, this was a fast-strain exposure, lower dose than a bite, probably earlier generation material, but still direct introduction through a compromised skin barrier, incubation for direct transfer, unstable, accelerating, unreliable. Dunning's biometric implant sat in his other wrist, embedded beneath the skin of his left arm. It required a living biosignal to authenticate. If Dunning's body ceased function, the implant ceased function with it. If the implant went dead, the vault stayed sealed, and every sacrifice we had made since the helicopter, every floor we had descended, every door we had passed through, every room of screaming men we had walked away from, bought nothing. I looked at the wound. I looked at the implant hand resting loose against Dunning's thigh. Then I looked at his face. He watched me the way every man watches a specialist examining something wrong with his body, searching for the verdict in the way I held his arm, the way my eyes moved across the cuts, the way I did or did not hesitate before speaking. He trusted me to tell him what biology had done. That trust was not sentimental, it was operational. It was also complete. "How bad?" he asked. The Halcyon Field Manual for confirmed fast-strain exposure was explicit: immediate quarantine, morphine for comfort, and termination before the duplication process reached somatic viability. The protocol existed because a splitting teammate in close quarters produced a feral duplicate inside your perimeter before anyone could contain it. "Looks superficial," I said. The suit absorbed the worst of it before the fabric gave way. Shallow transfer, probably insufficient volume to establish active infection. Jessup looked at me sharply. I wrapped Dunning's forearm with gauze from Jessup's kit, covering the wound and the clear fluid I knew was already working beneath the skin. "Keep the dressing tight," I said. "Watch for swelling, heat, unusual sensation in the arm. Flag it immediately." Dunning nodded. He accepted the assessment because pathogen evaluation was my role, my authority, the specific expertise the team relied on when biology became the threat. He accepted it because I had earned that trust across 3 years and 6 deployments, and because he had no reason to suspect I would examine a death sentence and call it a scratch. Lyndon watched me dress the wound from the step above. He said nothing. Jessup studied the cuts from 2 meters away, close enough to see the depth, far enough that I couldn't tell whether the doubt on his face was clinical or personal. I finished the wrap and helped Dunning to his feet. "Vault is 1 level down," I said. "We keep moving." We descended the stairwell towards sub-level 3. Dunning moved under his own power, gripping the railing with his uninjured hand. His color was good. His breathing was even. He had, by my best calculations, somewhere between 45 minutes and 2 hours before the virus finished its colonization phase and began building the duplicate. And every step of that estimate depended on Marsh's data being accurate for a pathogen already accelerating beyond its initial projections. The data vault was on sub-level 3. The download would take minutes. Dunning's wrist would touch a biometric scanner and open a door. The math was clean. The margin was adequate. The mission required his function, and the protocol said to kill him, and those 2 facts could not coexist. So I buried the protocol under the math and kept walking. Dunning followed me down the stairs, trusting the dressing on his arm and the man who had wrapped it. Sub-level 3 was where Vertex kept its serious work. The stairwell door opened onto a narrower corridor than the floors above. Single gurney width, reinforced walls replacing the painted cinder block. Level 4 biosafety lab suites lined the east wing behind heavy airlock doors, each sealed with electronic locks that showed red. Compromised, breached, or overridden from the inside. Emergency lighting was weaker here, maybe 40%, reducing visibility to 15 meters at best. We found the evidence of the facility's final stand within the first 100 meters. The security team had built barricades from lab equipment, overturned centrifuge housings, specimen storage racks, an autoclave unit dragged broadside across a corridor junction. Shell casings littered the floor behind the barricades. Dozens, maybe hundreds. The facility's security detail had fortified these positions and fired into the corridors until they ran dry or were overrun. It hadn't saved them. Blood covered the barricade surfaces and pooled behind them, and from every pool the trails split. 2 paths diverging from each source, one dragging toward the east wing, one toward the west. The security team hadn't just died here, they had been converted. Every man who fell became a new attacker, rising from his own opened body to join the things that had killed him. We encountered the completed duplicates 40 meters past the barricade line. They were faster than the cafeteria clones. Fully formed, upright, wearing only torn remnants and fragments caught around their bodies where the clothes of the originals had split with them. Their faces belonged to the facility's dead staff, lab technicians, security guards, maintenance workers. They moved through the corridors in loose groups of 3 and 4, with a predatory convergence that looked almost coordinated. A group rounded a junction 20 meters ahead and stopped when they registered us. 4 duplicates with human faces, standing in the dim corridor, their heads turning in unison. Silent, carrying nothing. Their hands hung at their sides with the fingers slightly curled, and their eyes held no expression at all. Lyndon fired first. 3 controlled bursts dropped the front 2. The remaining pair charged, covering the distance at a speed that forced me to revise everything I understood about their physical capability. Dunning and I fired together and put them down at 8 meters. One ricochet came off the corridor's reinforced corner with a sound like a struck bell. Lyndon grunted and shifted back half a step. Metal fragments had punched through the outer layer of his suit at the left thigh and scored a line across his side. Blood welled dark beneath the fabric. He looked down once, registered the injury, and reset his stance. "Status?" I asked. "Functional." We stepped over the bodies. They were human in every visible detail. Same skin, same hair, same fingernails. One had a pale indentation around the base of its left ring finger, a perfect band of missing sun where the original's wedding ring had been. The ring itself lay in the torn glove and meat of the original hand 10 meters back, stripped from the corpse and left behind. A perfect copy, with nothing behind the eyes. The corridor branched ahead. Lyndon sent Jessup down the right fork, a short spur to a specimen storage room, while the 3 of us held the main corridor. "Eyes open," Jessup said, and disappeared around the corner. We heard the impact, a body hitting a body at full speed, mass meeting mass in a confined space. Then a short sound from Jessup, cut off, a word that might have been a name. And then something else, wet, fast, the sound of a thing opening that was built to stay closed. I was around the corner in 3 seconds. Lyndon behind me. Jessup was on the corridor floor. His suit had been torn at the throat and chest, the front opened by a bite that had taken fabric, skin, and muscle together. His torso was already splitting from sternum to navel, the ribcage spreading apart from the inside as though something had gripped both halves and pushed outward until the cartilage gave. Beside him, crouching over the opened body, was a perfect naked copy of Carl Jessup. Same face, same build, same 3-day stubble, same crooked nose. Original and duplicate were still connected by ropes of wet tissue running from the copy's lower back into the open cavity of Jessup's chest. The duplicate was pulling itself free, tearing the last connections with small, jerking movements, the strands stretching thin and snapping one at a time. It raised its head and looked at me with Jessup's face. Jessup's brown eyes, Jessup's mouth. There was nothing of Jessup in it. Its mouth opened and produced a raw, vibrating hiss, air forced through a copied larynx by a nervous system built without the architecture for speech. Lyndon put 3 rounds into its chest. It collapsed across Jessup's opened body, and the 2 of them lay tangled in the connecting tissue, original and copy. The same ruined man in 2 versions. I stood over what was left. The split had taken less than a minute. Jessup had been alive and whole when he turned that corner. The duplicate tackled him, breached the suit at the throat and chest, and delivered a massive later-generation viral load directly into vascular tissue. Marsh's best data predicted ours. The physician's notes said the rate was accelerating. Both estimates were catastrophically slow. I looked at Dunning. He stood 4 meters back, sweating, his wrapped arm pressed against his body. The colour had dropped from his face since the stairwell. The exertion flush, replaced by a greyish pallor I recognised as the front edge of systemic viral colonisation. He was favouring the injured arm, holding it tight against his ribs, and the muscles of his face worked with unreported pain. Dunning's exposure was smaller, shallower, earlier. That mattered. It did not matter enough. I picked up Jessup's medic kit from the floor beside his body, checked the contents. IV catheters, saline lock, induction drugs, morphine ampules, gauze, shears, hemostats, cooling packs. The tools of a man whose job had been keeping people intact. I shouldered the kit and stepped away from the body. "The vault is at the end of the west corridor," I said. "We keep moving." Lyndon stared at Jessup's remains. When he turned to follow, he adjusted his grip on his rifle and winced. The thigh wound had opened further. Blood was tracking down the inside of his leg beneath the suit. 3 of us. 1 wounded, 1 infected, 1 carrying a dead man's tools and a portable drive that was still empty. We made it another 100 meters before Dunning went down. He dropped to 1 knee first, his good hand catching the wall for support. Then the second knee. He braced there for a few seconds, palms flat against the wall, and I watched his right arm, the wrapped one, begin to change. It happened in real time. The forearm beneath the gauze expanded, the wrapping pulling tight and then splitting as the tissue underneath pushed outward. The swelling climbed his arm in a visible wave, crossing the elbow, filling the upper arm, spreading into his shoulder. The suit fabric over his right shoulder tore along the seam. Beneath it, the skin had gone the same mottled purple I'd seen on Marsh's abdomen, and something was moving underneath, shifting, turning, pressing against the interior wall of muscle with a slow, purposeful force. The outline of a second shoulder blade formed where no shoulder blade belonged. "Grant!" Dunning's breathing had changed, shallow, forced, his chest rising in short, tight cycles. His right arm hung at his side, approaching twice its normal diameter, the fingers swollen stiff. "I can feel it building in my chest," he said. "There's a second heartbeat. It's behind my sternum, and it doesn't match mine." I knelt beside him. Lyndon covered the corridor. "Listen to me, Pete. I need you to—" "Stop." He raised his head and looked at me, eyes clear. The pain was there, but he held it behind a wall of professional discipline. The kind that comes from years of fieldwork where showing damage gets you pulled from operations. "I've been watching my arm for the last 10 minutes, he said. "I know exactly what's happening to me. Don't give me another assessment." I held his gaze. "You're infected," I said. "Fast strain, direct transfer. You've been positive since the cafeteria." "How long did you know?" "Since I examined the wound in the stairwell." He looked at the bandage, split open now across the swelling. The gauze I had wrapped around him hung from his arm in useless strips. Then he looked back at me. "How long do I have?" "I can't project it anymore. Marsh said under 2 hours for direct transfer. Jessup split in less than a minute after massive vascular exposure. Your dose was smaller, but the virus is accelerating and my estimates are unreliable." "Then why am I still walking, Grant?" He looked down at his left wrist, the uninjured one, the one with the biometric implant beneath the skin, and I watched him arrive at the answer. He closed his eyes. His swollen right shoulder hitched as the thing inside him shifted, and beneath the torn suit fabric the skin stretched taut over a shape rearranging itself. "The implant requires a living signal," he said. "It does. And if my body shuts down, the vault stays sealed." "That's right." He was quiet for 5 seconds. The duplicate's forming arm twitched beneath the skin of his shoulder. The fingers of a hand that didn't belong to him, curling and uncurling in a rhythm driven by a nervous system under construction inside his own body. "What's your plan?" he asked. I opened Jessup's medic kit and removed an IV catheter, a saline lock, and one of the propofol syringes. I tore open an alcohol wipe and cleaned the skin inside his left elbow. "Surgical sedation," I said. "Propofol through the line, cooling packs around the chest and neck. It won't stop cellular construction. but it should reduce movement, suppress panic response, lower heat load, and slow metabolic demand enough to buy time. Should. It's a theory. I don't have data to back it. And what happens to me under sedation? You go under. The process continues, slower. I get you to the vault. Your wrist touches the scanner. The door opens. I start the download. I held his gaze because he deserved that much now, if nothing else. The download will take minutes. When it's finished, I end this, before the split completes. You won't go the way Jessup went. He studied me. Behind the pain and fear and the discipline holding both in check, I saw him reach the bottom of the equation I had been running since the stairwell. The calculation that treated his body as a delivery vehicle for the implant in his wrist. He saw me clearly for the first time. He saw the shape of what I had done and exactly what kind of man runs the numbers that way. The injured arm jerked against his side. Dunning waited for the spasm to pass. "Promise me," he said, "when the download finishes, before it comes out. When the download is complete, I will kill you before the split finishes. You have my word, Pete." He extended his left arm. I placed the IV on the first attempt, flushed the line, and administered the propofol. His eyes lost focus inside 4 seconds, and his body sagged against the corridor wall. I caught him before he hit the floor. Lyndon helped me lift him onto a rolling lab cart we dragged from a research room 2 doors down. Dunning settled onto the cart's metal surface, his swollen arm hanging over the edge, the tissue beneath the mottled skin continuing to shift and restructure, even as the sedation deepened. I broke 2 cooling packs and wedged them along his neck and sternum. The swelling had crossed into his upper chest. Through the torn suit, pressing upward beneath the skin over his sternum, I could see the outline of a second face. A forehead, the ridge of a brow, the start of a nose. The sedation had slowed the process. It had not stopped it. Lyndon looked at the face forming under Dunning's skin. Then he looked at me. "I knew you lied about the wound," he said. "I knew it in the stairwell the moment you wrapped his arm. I've been running field operations since before you separated from the army, Grant. I can identify a lethal exposure from 3 meters away." "Then why didn't you overrule me?" "Because I'd already arrived at the same math. Without the implant, the vault stays sealed and we've lost the mission. I won't pretend I would have made a different call." He adjusted his grip on the cart handle. Blood was seeping through the suit fabric at his thigh. But I would have told him the truth. Given him the real assessment and let him walk toward that vault, knowing what it was going to cost him. You took that from him. You made the choice for a man who had the right to make it himself. I had nothing to say because every word of it was accurate. "Push the cart," Lyndon said. "We're losing time." We moved. The sedation was burning through faster than the dosage should have allowed. Dunning's metabolism running hot, the virus consuming everything his body could provide. Beneath the skin of his chest, the duplicate's face became more defined with each minute. Completed brow, closed eyelids, the bridge of a nose, lips sealed beneath a thinning membrane of host skin stretching toward translucence. 15 minutes, maybe less. After that, the propofol wouldn't matter. The vault corridor opened ahead of us, and I stopped the cart. It was a charnel gallery. The original bodies of Lockbourne's staff lined both walls, split open, hollowed, discarded like shed casings. Dozens of them, in torn lab coats and maintenance coveralls and security uniforms, each one ruptured from the inside, rib cages spread, abdominal cavities emptied, faces frozen in the final expression of separation. The floor was slick with fluid and biological residue. Among the bodies, crouching and feeding in slow territorial movements, the duplicates. 14, maybe more in the access corridor beyond the open security gate outside the vault. They hunched over the remains of their originals, pulling tissue from the opened cavities, scraping organic residue from the walls, gnawing at rubber floor seams. They clustered most densely around the vault door at the corridor's end, drawn by the concentration of bodies caught during the breach, held in place by sustained feeding. They crouched among the dead around the vault door, with the focused stillness of feral animals bedded down around a kill they would defend. Lyndon assessed from the junction. I counted what I could see, all completed, all capable of the speed that had killed Jessup. "Can't fight through that many," Lyndon said. "Ammunition won't last." "There's no alternative route. This corridor is the only access to the vault." He looked at the cart, at Dunning, at the face pressing upward through Dunning's chest, the features growing sharper under the thinning skin. Then back at the corridor full of crouching duplicates. "I'll draw them off," he said. "You take the cart to the vault door." He said it simply, the same tone he would use for any task assignment. Resource allocation, operational distribution, acceptable cost. "I'll move to the far end of this junction corridor and fire. The noise and muzzle flash pull them toward me. When they clear the vault entrance, you go. Roy, your leg. I'm down to 4 magazines, and I can't put weight on my left side without opening the thigh wound further. My operational value for the next 30 minutes is exactly one thing: drawing attention at the far end of a corridor while you get that door open." He checked his rifle's magazine, seated it, charged the action. "Get the data. Arm the thermobaric charge on the surface level during extraction. Standard site denial protocol. Nothing in this facility survives intact." I looked at him. 15 years of field operations. A man who had watched me lie to a dying teammate and understood the calculation clearly enough to let it happen, and who was now walking into a corridor of feral duplicates because the same calculation applied to himself and the math still held. "I'll trigger the charge," I said. "I know you will. It's what you're built for." He turned and moved down the junction corridor, limping, rifle up, each step a measured negotiation between his wounded leg and the floor. At the far end, 30 meters out, he stopped, braced his shoulder against the wall, and aimed toward the vault corridor entrance. Before he fired, he pulled one glove tighter at the wrist. The same seal check we had all done in the helicopter. A useless correction now, a habit from a world where procedure still had the power to save someone. Then he fired. The sound crashed through the sublevel, 3-round bursts, rapid, the muzzle flash strobing in the dim emergency lighting. The duplicates in the vault corridor responded instantly. Heads turned, bodies rose from their feeding positions. They oriented on the sound, the motion, the strobing brightness at the far end of the junction, and they moved. One by one, then in clusters, they abandoned the bodies around the vault door, drawn by the stimuli Marsh had described: motion, sound, the promise of something living at the other end of a corridor. 8 of the 14 moved toward Lyndon. The remaining 6 were deeper inside the access corridor, slower to react, still feeding. I pushed the cart. The wheels caught on the slick floor. I drove it forward through the corridor of opened bodies, boots sliding on the wet tile, the cart rattling over rubble. Dunning's unconscious form shifted with each jolt. The duplicate's face beneath his skin had developed further. Visible eyelids, a completed nose, parting lips. I reached the vault door. The biometric scanner was mounted at wrist height, a flat pad with a green status indicator. I grabbed Dunning's left wrist and pressed it against the surface. His skin was fever-hot, the implant beneath it registering against the scanner. The indicator cycled. 2 seconds of nothing. Then the lock disengaged, a heavy, solid report of steel retracting, and the vault door unsealed, swinging inward on pneumatic hinges. I dragged the cart inside and hit the interior door control. The vault sealed behind me. Inside, a clean, climate-controlled server room. Equipment racks along 3 walls, status indicators glowing blue and green, a data terminal centered against the back wall with a transfer port matching the portable drive in my kit. Emergency power kept the servers running. The room was intact, untouched since the breach, sealed and waiting. I connected the portable drive to the terminal and initiated the archive transfer. A progress bar appeared on the screen. Estimated completion time, 8 minutes. I pushed another dose of propofol through Dunning's IV and packed the last cooling charges along his sternum. The sedation might buy a few more minutes. It might buy nothing. Dunning lay on the cart beneath the server room's blue-white lighting. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven cycles. The swelling had consumed his entire torso, his right arm grotesque, 3 times its proper size, the skin stretched to a gloss, the tissue visibly restructuring in slow waves beneath it. Through the skin of his chest, the duplicate's face was complete. Closed eyes, finished nose and mouth. The membrane covering it had thinned to near transparency, and beneath it I could see the duplicate's eyelids moving, rapid, searching, tracking something only the unfinished copy could perceive. The progress bar filled. 1 minute. Outside the vault, Lyndon's gunfire continued. Controlled bursts, spaced, disciplined. A man rationing his remaining rounds against a corridor of things that could absorb bullets and keep moving. 2 minutes. Dunning's body began to heat the air around him. Condensation gathered on the inside of his faceplate. The cooling packs along his sternum softened and went slack, spent in less than half the time printed on the casing. 3 minutes. The sedation collapsed. The duplicate's arm came through the wall of Dunning's abdomen. It emerged below the ribs on his right side, a complete forearm, hand, and 5 spread fingers, slick with fluid, grasping at the server room air. Dunning's body convulsed on the cart. His eyes opened. The drug had burned through and he was awake, aware, feeling everything, the arm inside him tearing free. The pressure of the duplicate expanding against his compressed organs. The interior experience of being consumed by a thing assembling itself from his own tissue. His mouth opened. The sound was the voice of someone who could feel himself being replaced, organ by organ, by something that would wear his face and carry nothing of him forward. I held him on the cart. His left hand, the implant hand, the hand I had kept functional through lies and sedation and cold arithmetic, gripped my forearm, and his fingers dug into the suit fabric with a force that came from somewhere deeper than muscle. His eyes found mine. He said nothing. The question was the same one he had asked in the corridor, and the answer was behind me on the screen, the progress bar still filling, percentage by slow percentage, while the thing inside him tore itself free. 4 minutes. Outside the vault door, Lyndon's gunfire thinned. 5 minutes. Single shots now, widely spaced. The duplicate's second arm pushed through Dunning's left side. His torso was opening along the midline, the ribcage flexing outward under internal pressure, the new body shouldering the bones apart as it emerged from the chest cavity. Dunning's breathing had become a ragged, aspirated whistle. His lungs were being compressed. His heart was being displaced by a second heart building itself from the walls of his own. 6 minutes. The gunfire stopped. I watched the screen. I held Dunning's hand. These 2 actions occupied the same space, and the distance between mercy and utility had narrowed to a margin I could no longer measure. 7 minutes. The duplicate's torso pressed through the opened ribcage, shouldering the bones aside, new skin glistening under the server room light. Its face turned beneath the membrane of Dunning's stretched chest, mouth working without breath, eyelids fluttering against skin that had not yet torn. 7 minutes, 40 seconds. The progress bar completed, transfer indicator, green. Archive secured. I pulled the drive free and put it in my breast pocket. Dunning's eyes were still on me. His lips moved. No sound came through. His lungs were gone or nearly gone, compressed to a fraction of their volume by the body being assembled inside his chest. But I saw the shape of the word I had promised to answer. I drew my sidearm, set the muzzle against his temple, and fired. Dunning's body went still. The duplicate, half emerged, torso and arms free, its lower body still embedded in the wreckage of its host, shuddered once, then sagged. The arms went slack. The copied face, Dunning's face rendered in new tissue, lost its animation and dropped against the host's opened chest. Without the original's living metabolism to fuel the final construction stage, the process stalled. The incomplete copy died in the same second as the man it had been consuming. I stood in the vault for 10 seconds. Dunning lay on the cart, opened, hollowed, connected to his half-born duplicate by the structures they had briefly shared. The servers ran quietly around me. The transfer drive sat in my breast pocket, warm from the terminal port. Primary deliverable secured. I unsealed the vault door. The corridor outside had partially cleared. Some duplicates had followed Lyndon's path and had not returned. Others crouched over bodies near the vault entrance, feeding, paying me no attention. I moved fast along the right wall, stepping over remains, my sidearm up. A duplicate near the junction raised its head as I passed. 2 rounds into its torso dropped it without breaking my stride. The junction corridor was empty except for what it had cost us. At the far end, where Lyndon had made his stand, shell casings covered the floor in a brass carpet. Blood marked the walls. Lyndon's rifle lay against the baseboard, the magazine well stripped bare. Of Lyndon himself, there were 2 blood trails extending from a single pool at the base of the wall, diverging in opposite directions. 2 trails. 1 source. I didn't stop. I reached the stairwell and climbed. Sub-level 2 was thick with residual smoke from the cafeteria fire, the air hazy and hot but breathable through the suit's sealed filtration. I crossed to the freight elevator, rode it to the surface, and stepped out through the loading dock into the Tennessee night. The thermobaric demolition charge was where Lyndon had staged it during our initial entry, a compact package in a reinforced case, standard halcyon kit for site denial operations. I armed it, set the timer for 15 minutes, and walked through the loading dock door into the gravel lot. The helicopter was inbound. I could hear the rotors somewhere above the hills in the dark. I stood in the lot with the drive in my pocket and the sidearm still in my hand, and waited. The helicopter landed. I climbed aboard. At 15 minutes, the Lockbourne facility detonated beneath the hillside. The surface building folded inward as the sublevels blew, and a column of fire and rubble punched through the Tennessee clay and into the night sky. Then it settled. Smoke, dust, a crater where a building had been, filling slowly with dark earth and silence. I rode the helicopter east with the drive in my breast pocket. Clean hands, sealed suit, integrity confirmed. The math said I was uncontaminated. The debrief lasted 4 days. A windowless conference room at a classified Vertex facility in Northern Virginia. Metal table, 4 chairs, a recording system that ran without pause. 2 Vertex executives and a military liaison whose branch affiliation was never stated. They asked about the data transfer, integrity percentage, encryption status, archive completeness. They asked about vault access, biometric protocol, implant response time, terminal interface. They asked about the thermobaric deployment, timer setting, structural yield, confidence in total site destruction. Across 4 days, they spent less than 20 minutes on my team. Lyndon, Dunning, Jessup, confirmed dead, documented, filed under operational losses. The questions were procedural. Time of death. Cause of death. Confirmation that the demolition left no recoverable remains. I provided the answers. Lyndon. Overrun at his position. Killed and duplicated. Jessup. Ambushed in a corridor. Killed and duplicated in under 60 seconds. Dunning. Infected via direct tissue contact. Utilized for biometric vault access. Terminated by team specialist before somatic separation completed. Utilized. The word I chose. The word they wrote down without comment or clarification. 3 weeks after the debrief, I received a copy of Vertex's official incident report. The containment breach was classified as catastrophic failure during scheduled pathogen research. The response mission was graded successful, primary deliverable secured. In the risk assessment appendix, printed in a typeface so small it seemed designed to avoid being noticed, my team was listed under anticipated operational attrition consistent with pre-deployment survival projections. Pre-deployment projections. They had calculated the likelihood of the team surviving before the helicopter left the ground, concluded that one man walking out was the expected outcome, and sent 4 men anyway because 4 was the minimum complement to reach the vault, and 1 was the minimum needed to carry the drive home. The projections were correct. They had always been correct. I was offered a promotion to Field Operations Director for Halcyon Biosec's Eastern Division. I accepted. I passed the mandatory post-incident psychological evaluation without difficulty. 9 years of military service and 3 years of corporate deployment had taught me which answers indicate fitness for continued fieldwork and which answers trigger a medical hold. I knew the template. I followed it cleanly. I did not mention Marsh behind his containment door, reciting his vital signs. I did not mention the 8 minutes in the vault, or the progress bar, or the word shaped by a mouth whose lungs had already been consumed. I was assigned a new team, 4 men. I reviewed their personnel files, memorized their medical histories, noted which member carried the biometric clearance package for the next deployment. I ran equipment checks. I briefed them on insertion protocol and site denial procedure. They were professionals. They listened carefully. They trusted my assessments the way Dunning had trusted mine, because trust in a specialist's judgment is what keeps a small team functional under biological threat, and because they had no way to imagine that I might weigh their survival against a file transfer and find the transfer heavier. At night, in the corporate apartment Halcyon maintains for field personnel outside Arlington, I sit in the dark and check my forearms for swelling. I press my fingers along my ribs, searching for a second heartbeat that would confirm what the decontamination scans have already ruled out. I examine the skin over my sternum for the discoloration I saw on Marsh, on Dunning, the mottled purple that means the process has begun. Every scan confirms I am clean. Every blood panel returns negative. I am uninfected, undamaged, operationally sound. I check again anyway. The equation that produced the vault outcome was correct. Every variable was accounted for. The mission objective was secured, transferred, delivered, and accepted by the client. Grant Sadler performed within parameters. The math held. It has always held. But I have learned that a correct equation can produce an answer that sits in a man like something with weight and structure, something that grows in a space he did not know was empty, pressing outward against the interior walls of the person he understood himself to be. The thing inside me has a name in every report, and none of the reports name it correctly. It is the knowledge of what I did in a clean room while a progress bar filled. It is held in the body alongside everything else, becoming more defined with each passing week, until the shape of it is unmistakable, and the question stops being whether it is there. The question becomes how much of him it has already consumed to build itself. I go back to work. I do not ask Vertex what they are building with the data. I knew in the vault. I knew when I wrapped Dunning's arm and told him the wound was superficial. I knew when I refused to unseal Marsh's door. The knowledge was there at every decision point, and at every point I chose the mission, and the mission was always the weapon. The man who carries the weapon's blueprints home is part of the weapon whether he fires it or not. I go back to work. I check my skin at night. I wait for the swelling that will never come, because the thing growing inside me has no need for a virus.